before they gained their independence, Finland was a Grand Duchy of Imperial Russia. And 600 years before that, they were under Swedish king rule. Think about that. For 700 years, Finland was under foreign occupation. Yet the Finnish people maintained their own language, their own customs, their own traditions. The Finnish people have a word for that, and many of you know it, sisu. That means perseverance in the face of adversity. Now, I would like you to hear from Ann Pohto. Ann was born in Finland, and so that you can hear what the Finnish sounds like, I've asked her to do both her introduction in English and Finnish. Thank you.
Huomenta. Minä olen Anne Kalliomaa Pohto. Olen syntynyt Orismalassa, Suomessa. Meidän perhe tuli Amerikkaan, kun minä olin 9 vuoden vanha kesällä 1955. Kävin 3 luokkaa Suomen koulussa. Me asuimme maakunnalla, ei englantia opetettu kouluissa. Nyt lapset oppivat englantia ensimmäisellä luokalla. Did any of you understand anything? Little bit? Okay, good evening. I'm Ann Kalliomaa Pohto. I was born in Orismala, Finland. My family came to America when I was 9 years old in the summer of 1955. I had attended school for 3 years. There was no English in the country schools. Now students began learning English in 1st grade in Finland. Learning English was not easy. To learn to think in English took a long time. My dream was to become a teacher. With hard work and persistence, I became a teacher. For 35 years, I taught 4th grade and reading. I was a reading specialist in the elementary schools. And helping students, I wanted them to learn to love to read. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Donna Lesiacsek, and she'll be telling a little bit about herself.
My name is Donna Lesiacsek, and like Ron, I too am a 2nd-generation American of Finnish descent. I grew up in Fairport Harbor and have always lived in Lake County. I retired from the corporate banking department of Charter One Bank in Cleveland. When the Finnish Heritage Museum opened in 2007, I keep saying 19, I'm not sure why, 2007, we looked at the names of all the Finnish people in the village, and then we started with their backgrounds. Our guiding light was Helen Laakso Kasari. She was my 2nd grade teacher. Living in a small town like Fairport, you know everybody, and these people just keep staying in your life if you stay there. So with Helen's help, and at the time she was in her 90s and had to use a huge magnifying glass all the time, and I know that's what's coming down the road for me. She had macular degeneration, and we all have something. But Helen, really prompted us to stay with the heritage and stay with knowing these people. And when you study them, you get to know them, one way or the other. She was always an historian, and I know she did a lot of work at the Fairport Lighthouse, too. let's see, where am I? But our biggest advantage being in Fairport was Zion Lutheran Church, because Zion Lutheran Church was founded in 1891 by the Finns, and the records are phenomenal. They've been very well kept, and then of course we have Anne, who can translate from the Finnish to the English. And our pastor at Zion had always been a circuit minister. And I'm sure you all heard of circuit ministers. And he traveled the whole state of Ohio, performing marriages, funerals, whatever was needed. And at one time, because of the language, well, he just went everywhere. So there are records at Zion that go way back and cover the entire state because of the language. And if you've ever done genealogy work, you know it can be very tedious. Sometimes you look for years for just one person. And until you can find that one person, nothing else seems to fit into place. We have taken field trips, participated in plays, conducted a children's program at the Cleveland Cultural Gardens, the Finnish Garden, of course. And every year they have a huge celebration on Martin Luther King Boulevard. They close the whole boulevard for a day. It's in August. Look for it. And we usually have a fair group there from the museum because we now maintain that garden, the Finnish Garden. And this year, the estimate of the attendees was 15,000. So you can imagine what that entails. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to see. And you have people of every nationality. With DNA testing and interest growing among younger folks, because they haven't always been, it's not until you get to your 60s that you start to really want to know what your heritage is. We have younger people stepping up to the plate, but not as many as we'd like. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. It's been over 3 years because of COVID that we've been together, the three of us, to make this presentation. So you're going to see us kind of talking to each other as we go through on these slides to make sure that we cover the things we want to. This is a photo of the museum, and if you could talk about the sculpture that is there, if you have any information on that.
Okay, this was done by Ken Välimäki, and it has, the sculpture is S's for Sisu, Suomi, sauna, and many of the Finnish words that start with S. So it is a sculpture in that way, and we took donations for it. So there is a donation chart on this side over here of everyone who donated towards that sculpture. And the person who did it was a Fairporter who's in Columbus. So he's a sculptor, and he's done lots of sculptures all over America.
And the museum is open on Saturdays, and the hours are that the museum is open?
10 to 3.
10 to 3 on Saturdays. So you met Donna and Ann, and we also had some help from outside of the Heritage Museum, Loretta Schumacher. She's from Mentor, and I just wondered, is Loretta here? Because I know she comes to the library. Okay. She teaches genealogy and has done it for the city of Mentor. And we relied on her when it became difficult for us to find some information that the three of us couldn't find. She was very helpful. So in May of 2016, our museum received an email from Maria Rannila, a Finnish woman living in Switzerland. She did not know anybody in Fairport, or she didn't know anybody at the Fairport Museum. She found the museum doing a Google search and sent her email just to the museum. She said that she and her family of 6 were coming to Fairport Harbor in 2 weeks to visit where their great-grandmother had been born in 1894. She wanted to know if anyone at the museum could help her find information about their great-grandmother, whose name was Lempi Valli. They only knew that she was born, as I said, in 1894, nothing else about the family or Lempi. So Ann, Donna, and I, from the Genealogy Committee, were tasked with searching for information about Lempi. I personally responded to Maria's email and let her know that we would try to do our very best to find out information about their great-grandmother. Obviously, we were under a time constraint. It's difficult to find information about people from the late 1800s. The Rannila Project is a story about the genealogical search for information about their lost ancestor. But it's more than that. It's a human interest story about the benefits and long life connections that can be made through genealogical searches. It is also about the incredible kindness and generosity of people, some of them complete strangers, who are willing to help others in their searches. So our search began. We used a lot of different website and areas of search. We used Google, Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, census records, photo albums, state and county and vital records, personal visits, personal phone calls, the museum archives, the Zion Lutheran Church archives, cemetery archives. Did I miss any, ladies?
I think you got them.
Okay. During that 2-week period, we were able to find 51 documents and photographs detailing the life of their great-grandmother, Lempi Valli. And we spent hours searching, and it was very emotional work. I know there were times that tears came as we searched. The family?
Family, this was the family that came to visit us. Okay? We'll start with the older ones first. Aulis was the gentleman on the right, and his wife, Marketa. Aulis was the grandson of one of the sons that we're going to be talking about. So he was the closest relative. And then we have Jyrki, the gentleman there, the father. He is the son of Aulis and his wife, Maria. And Maria was the person who did all the contacting to us. She knew English very, very well. So she emailed Ron, and Ron was so efficient always. He would answer that email so quickly because we only had 2 weeks. Okay, and then the 2 children. Would you like to talk about the 2 children, Donna?
This photo has a real story behind it. Leo, the little guy with his hands up, he came to America hoping to enhance his English. You know, we did the best we could, but he also forgot his phone, like I forgot my phone tonight. But he forgot his phone, so he made a cardboard phone. And we all stood out in front of the museum, smiling, for him to take us a picture of all of us. And little Ella, she was delightful, but she didn't have much to say. Well, she was only 2 years old. And she sat next to me at lunch. This kid's working on a computer or a laptop or something. At that point, I didn't even have a laptop. But she was really working away at this thing. So, and they were both really nice kids, you know, no issues with the parents or anything like that. So, yeah, we had a good time with them.
Thank you. This is a photo, of course, of Yorkie and Maria. They live in Switzerland, but they were born in Finland. They met in college, and they got their first job in Switzerland at an insurance company. Maria, who speaks 9 languages, works in human resources, and Yorkie, her husband, works at the same company in risk management. Alice and Marketa live in Finland. They're retired bakers. So Alice is Lempi's grandmother. Grandson, yes. So Lempi is his grandmother. Leo, just 6 at the time, spoke Finnish, English, Russian, and German, 4 languages, not yet in school.
And was learning Chinese.
And yes, learning Chinese. Ella, age 2, was just a delight. She was very active, a lot of energy. We took a visit from the museum where we met and to the square in Fairport, where there is a Finnish memorial. Do you have any other information about the Finnish memorial there?
We have bricks there for remembering our ancestors.
Yes. I know our family has a brick there. And also, Alice and Marketa and then Yorkie and Maria also ordered bricks to be around the museum, around the monument. We presented gifts to them. We met at the museum, and it was quite an event. It was covered by the News Herald and the paper, and photographer was there. And we prepared 2 books of those 51 documents and photographs, one for Yorkie and Maria and one for Marketa and for Alice. So, Lempi's biological parents. Now, Anne, you can do better pronunciation on the names than I.
Okay. So these were the original parents. Jaakko Oskari Valli married Britta Johanna Blusisaari in 1893. We found that information in our church records, and it was in Finnish. Then they had 2 children, Lempi Maria, who was born February 27th, 1894, and Johan Alfred, November 15th, 95. Okay, so then, okay, should we go to the next one? Okay, Lempi with her biological parents, okay?
Now, remember, the Rannila family did not have any of these photographs or any of this information, and it's information that we got them. So they're seeing these photographs for the first time.
Okay, tragedy struck, as it did in many families. So after 6 months, when the brother was 6 months old, he died. And He was buried in the Potter's Field at Evergreen Cemetery. 2 years later, in 1898, the mother passed away of consumption, and she was buried at Evergreen in an unmarked grave. And 2 months after that, the father died of the same consumption and is buried in Evergreen. So Mary, she was Lemby and Mary. At times she was called Mary. Mary was an orphan. She had lost her whole family. So when she was 4 years old, she had no biological family at all.
This is the search for the graves.
Okay, so because we had such a short time, the day before they were to arrive, we realized we don't know where the graves are. And so they were unmarked graves. So I went to the Evergreen Cemetery office. I went to the maintenance office. I didn't realize it was not the genealogical office. I went to the main Evergreen maintenance office, and there was a gentleman there on his lunch break, and I said, I'm looking for some graves. Would you be able to help me? And he said, well, I can call the genealogy department, and he did. He called the genealogy department, found the numbers for the graves, and said, follow me, they're here, follow me, and I will show you where they are. So I would have never found them if I hadn't gone to the office and if somebody hadn't shown me. So we found the graves. I put some sticks there. And then the next day, we had a funeral procession. We all were in different cars, and we went to the grave, and we had flowers. You know, the Finns always have cut flowers when we were entertaining them. So we took the roses and we put the flowers, and that's where you see then.
In this photo on the right is Aldous, and then next
Yes.
to the left is Anne, and then Marquetta, and then Yorkie, and then Anne. And these is the actual place where they're buried, but there is no marker
There's
there.
no markers there. So the picture, do we have the picture of, here he's putting the rose at his great-great-great-grandparents' grave. And what was so interesting was his grandmother, Margetta, said, this alone, having found these graves, was enough of a trip for us. And that was only the beginning of it, because there were many other surprises that came along.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we continue our search. In the 1900 census, we find Lempi, Mary Volley, age 6, living as a charity boarder in the household of Jacob and Anna Koski in Jacksonville, Ohio. Its history is that the Finnish men in Fairport or Conneaut or Ashtabula would work the ore boats. They unloaded ore with shovels and buckets at that time, so it was very backbreaking work. When the lake would freeze over, the Finnish men would go to southern Ohio and work in the coal mines, so they would have employment year-round. So there was a Finnish community in Jacksonville, Ohio, where a Koski family was willing to take in, as a charity boarder, Lempi. And this is a picture of Jacob and Anna Koski, and again, it's a photograph that the Rannila family had never ever seen. And think about this, we're doing this within a 2-week period to find all these documents. In the 1910 census, we find Lempi Mary, age 16, living as the daughter of Jacob and Anna Koski in Jacksonville, Ohio. Now, Jacksonville, Ohio is in the Appalachia area in southern Ohio, just outside of Athens, Ohio. It's a coal mining town. This is a picture of Lempi that we found at the age of 17 when she was living in Jacksonville with the Koski family. And then in 1911, she was married to Victor Rannila, and this is a copy of their marriage license. I'm not sure where we found this one.
This one was at Zion Lutheran Church. It was at our church, and his name was not Rannila at that time. It was Ulvos. Ulvos. The name was changed later to Rannila.
They were so pleased to be able to get this picture of Aulis. I'm sorry,
Victor.
of Victor and Mary or Lempi, their wedding pictures. And here's the.
Okay, and he was the circuit that the minister that Donna had spoken about. Happanen went to Jacksonville and married there. They did not come to Fairport to be married, so he married them at the church or somewhere in Jacksonville.
So in the 1910 census, we find Victor Rannila, 25 years old, living in a household of Matti and Anna Rihamäki. Now this is where it became interesting to me, because Matti and Anna Rihamäki are my great-grandparents. Think about that. This is Victor Rannila, Eulis at that time, and this is my grandfather, Emil Kita. They were both born in Soini. Victor is about 8 or 9 years younger than my grandfather, Emil, but it's obviously when he came to America, he went to where somebody from his village was, and that was Emil Kita in Jacksonville, Ohio, my mother's father. Now this is the Rihamäki house in Jacksonville, Ohio in 1910. Now think about this. Victor's living in that house in 1910. He's about to marry a 17-year-old girl, a Koski, living nearby. Don't you think that she would visit in that home where he's living? In 1910, when Victor was living in that home, my mother was born in that house. I can see Mary holding my mother. Lempi had 3 children. Sulo, born in 1912. Edwin Eugene, born in 1915. And Amara, born in 1918. And this is a photograph with her 2 oldest boys. Lempi dies at the age of 25 in 1919 and is buried in the Russellville Cemetery in Jacksonville, Ohio. We could not find Victor or his sons in the 1920 census. Sometime before that, he returned to Finland with the boys to be near his family. Ann, you want to explain that?
Okay. He went, because he had no family here, he went to Finland with the boys because there was family there. And tragedy struck with the boys. And do we have that? Yes. Ilmari dies in Finland. He was the youngest one. He dies in a scalding accident. And the oldest one, Sulo, dies of consumption, again, respiratory illness. So 2 of the boys die very soon after they get to Finland. So there's only one left of these 3 boys. And he is Edwin, who is the father to the Aulis who came, and his grandson and great-grandson. So he was the only one left. and they wanted to know about what was what their ancestry was here in America.
An interesting thing happened when we presented the books to the Rannila family at the museum. Before things got started, it was very confusing, people talking Finnish, English, and Ed Allis had given a picture, a Polaroid picture of he and his father and a woman from Lake County named Tony Johnson that visited in 1974 from America. And
Yes.
So she brought the photograph back to me, and I said, "Don't tell him that's my aunt." We didn't want him to know at this particular point. So after visiting with us and getting their books from us, they drove to Jacksonville, Ohio. And as I mentioned, that's in southern Ohio, near Athens, and it's a coal mining town. This is the coal mine that Victor worked in along with my grandfather, and it's in this coal mine in 1934 in a coal mining accident that my grandfather was injured and then died 6 months later in 1934. Now, as I mentioned, Jacksonville, Appalachia, very cautious people, and they wanted to go down there and find where their grandmother was buried, and I didn't want them just to drive down there and appear, so I called down, and this is the Jacksonville Village Hall, and I didn't know the mayor, but I got a hold of the mayor named Tony McNichol, and I said that there's a family coming down in a couple of days to Jacksonville. They're from Switzerland. They've come 4,000 miles to Jacksonville to see where their great-grandmother and great-grandmother was buried. And he's very cautious. And I said, well, I know Jacksonville because my mother was born there in 1909. And he said, cautiously, he said, well, where's she buried? And I said, well, she's buried in Cleveland, but most of my relatives are buried in the Taylor Ridge Cemetery. Now, this is a cow pasture that you go through, and then up on top of a knoll, a beautiful little cemetery with trees in it. And that's the Taylor Ridge Cemetery. And he said, oh, I've got relatives in Taylor Ridge. Now, what do you need? And I said, well, they want to go to the Russellville Cemetery. That's where their grandmother's buried. And he said, well, you got to talk to Buck. He said, he's the trustee in charge of all of the cemeteries. And again, this is the Taylor Ridge Cemetery, and that is my grandfather's marker at that cemetery. So I make a phone call to Buck. Now, you talk about if Tony was suspicious. He's a coal mining superintendent. He's not going to give anything to anybody. And then, so the same conversation went, my mother was born there. I'd been there before. My relatives are at the Taylor Ridge Cemetery. And he said, oh, I've got relatives there. What do you need? And I said, well, they're coming down to Russellville Cemetery. And he said, oh, my goodness. He said, no one's been buried there in 50 years. He said, I don't even think we have records. So he said, no, that's not right. He said, about 10 years ago, I got a call from a lady in Cincinnati saying, Grandma want to put Grandma in Russellville Cemetery. And I told her, no, ain't no plots. And then I'm thinking, there's a family here, bought 10 plots, only one buried. I'd give her one of those free. So they've come 4,000 miles, and they're greeted. This is Allis on the left, the father-in-law. Yorkie, there's Buck, dressed up in his best. And Tony McNichol, and their wives, and a court reporter, and the historian, and a bunch of other people. And they spent hours and hours searching for Lempe's grave. Maria said later on, she said it was 95 degrees, it was hot, You know, we searched almost 2 hours. We looked at every gravestone. We cleaned some gravestones to look at the names. We couldn't find him. And there was, everybody's back at the car. And Alice is walking through. And he sees a tombstone buried in the ground. He turns it over. That's his grandma. Here they are. That's Alice in the background. Still surprised. Now I want you to think about this. It's 97 years since anybody's been at that gravesite. And there's a beautiful song. We all know it. But it's going to mean something different to you after this. Danny Boy. Think about it. Ladies.
But when ye come and all the flowers are dying, if I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say, an Ave there for me. And I shall hear, though soft you tread above me, and all my graves will warmer, sweeter be, for you will bend and tell me that you love me. And I shall sleep in peace until you come to me.
I have a second cousin in Helsinki that she and her husband have done 5 books of genealogy on the Spangler family in Finland. And my mother's family was part of the Spangler family. And years ago, 15, 20 years ago, she sent me information about my family. And during the search, the night before, the Rannilas arrived, I opened up the file that she had sent to me. And in that file was a folder that said Rannila. And I opened that up. And it goes back to, if you get it right.
Okay. 1745, Liisa Hernesmaa and Marketta Hernesmaa in 1765.
So the father, born in 1710, had 2 daughters, Lisa and Marketta. Come down 7 generations on this side is my name. Come down 7 generations on Marketta's side is Alice's name, the father-in-law. We are related back to 1710. Think about that. An email sent from Switzerland to a museum that they didn't know anybody is answered by somebody related to them going back to 1710. So this is a photo of Alice and I, 7 generations. This is Yerke and my son Brad. They're about the same age. Yerke's maybe 5 or 6 years younger, but that's the 8th generation of that family. So think about it. What are the odds? There are 35,000 museums in the United States. There's 320 million people in the United States. And what are the odds that an email from Switzerland seeking information about their great-grandmother would be answered by someone related to them? They visit New York City and fly home. Actually, they went to Pittsburgh because they're great hockey fans, and it was the championship Penguins playing at that time, and they went to the game, then went to New York City, did touring, and then headed home. So I ask you, you be the judge. Was it fate? Was it luck or divine intervention? Ask your questions. Yes.
Who was buried in the Evergreen Cemetery?
Mary Valley, who was the one who was,
No, Evergreen was burial.
Yeah.
Was the
her parents,
biological.
the real parents of Lemby were buried at the Evergreen Cemetery. And then she never came back to this area. She lived over there from age 6 until she passed away. She lived there with her family, and she is buried in Jacksonville. And what's so interesting is that it was her grandson, Aulis, who found the gravestone. He was her closest relative.
Any other questions?
Now, could I go on? The
Yes.
story continues. Okay, it's never the end of a story. Just about a month ago, a person from Mississippi contacted the museum. His name was Michael Ryan, and he was searching for information about his grandfather. And his name was Benjamin Mackey, and who had come from Finland at the age of 17 to live with an aunt and uncle, Jacob and Anna Koski, in Jacksonville, Ohio in 1900. I was stunned. I called him. I said, "Oh my goodness, I know that name from our project." And yes, so Mary had gone there about the same time. They, had her come there in 1900. So she lived with the Koskis. They had no children. Koskis had no children, but they had a boarding house. So I found in the census, I found all these boarders, and I found his grandfather at age 17 in 1900 as one of the residents, and they called him their nephew. So he lived there. So this Benjamin Mackey lived with Lemby and the Koskis for 10 years. He started mining at age 17. So he became her family. That whole Koski family became Lemby's family. She had no other family. So then in 1910, she was still there. She was only 16 at that time. And he was 27. And he got married then soon after that, and she did the next year. So they knew each other. I mean, it was unbelievable, and I'm sure she helped out at the rooming house. And so then I started looking, and I talked to this Michael. I said, "Michael, I've discovered something." And he said, "You know what? The reason his mother was named Mary Mackey. She was named Mary because of Lemby Mary, because they used to call Lemby Mary. So he named his daughter, and that's the only child he had, as Mary, for this person he had lived with all this time." And so then tragedy struck. Those people knew each other. So in 1910, the Benjamin Mackey married Johanna, and Lemby in 1911 married Victor, and then the boys were born, but there was a little girl born to this Mackey, Benjamin Mackey. Her name was Mary Mackey, and then 1918, his wife dies. That was the time we had the epidemic. So she died, and in 1919, Mary Ulvis or Lempi Ulvis dies of the same thing. So they both died of the epidemic. So then the child that Ben Mackey had lost her mother at age 6. So history keeps repeating. And then in 1920, the Ulvis family became the Rannila family and went back to Finland. But they had lost their mother. But to have found this person that lived in that rooming house was unbelievable. So she was well taken care of by these people.
There's a photo album here, which was my great aunt, my mother's sister, mother's sister, Aunt Augusta. And all of these photographs that we saw and found on the Rannila was out of that photograph album. So we were lucky to find those photographs of them. So that concludes it. I appreciate being patient with us when we had a little trouble getting things started, but Lisa was great getting things started.